I'm joined by Kamlesh Harry. Thank you very much for coming.
Careful having me.
I think we're going to talk about mules. And I think my first question, what I would be really interested to know is, how mature do you think mule detection is now? Where are we at? What's the sort of current status of mule detection?
So I think it depends on the market. Depending where you are, there's different levels of maturity. If we're looking at Asia, they've done a lot in this space. Specifically, Hong Kong has had a targeted impact in terms of trying to address some of the concerns they've highlighted over the past. Traditionally, they've always been unfortunately labeled as one of those locations, together with Southeast Asia, as being recipients of fraudulent money through mule accounts. So clearly that was a focus for them, and they've collaborated with a number of banks to be able to achieve what they have achieved today. Having said that, as fraudsters normally do, they moved from one jurisdiction to another purely because they see the opportunity closing down or potentially reducing, and they move on to other locations. And typically, even some of the scam centers that we see today that traditionally was heavily based in Southeast Asia are moving now towards the Western world. So we do see it across Europe, even in the UK and elsewhere across the globe as well.
What do you think the key tools are in terms of the prevention of these kind of cross-border mule networks?
So I think the first thing is education. Because if we look at the fundamentals around a mule account, it's typically a genuine account that's been opened up in the past. And in order to identify that, it becomes difficult for an organization to really focus on whether it's a legitimate account that's being used for legitimate purposes, or whether it's someone that's potentially sold off the account or exposed the account to undue risk in terms of sharing information. So from that perspective, it is rather challenging for organizations to do so. But I think over time, it's a matter of identifying specific trends within the account, activities from not just the device being connected to the account, but also activity on the account as well. So is it a specific individual making payments to a specific country that they've never made a payment to before? Values to that manner as well, and similarly velocity in terms of the number of payments. Normally, what I've observed in the past is we've had accounts that are sitting dormant for a number of years, and then all of a sudden there's a build-up in terms of activity. Initially, it might be smaller values, but ultimately growing to larger values where money is constantly be brought into the account, and within either days or even minutes, for that matter, being taken out again. So we do see some of those indicators which would help towards identifying it. I think as we've seen some of the regulations in the UK around reimbursement for specific types of frauds, fraudsters unfortunately have looked at this and thought, well, there's an opportunity here to go cross-border, and that's where we start to see more and more cross-border type payments going through mule accounts as well.
Interesting. Okay, the bit for me that I find to be sort of most intriguing about the nature of mule detection is the crossover. So when does it become actionable? What's the point at which you can go, that account is not just doing strange things, but legitimately that's actually muling money?
Yeah, it's an interesting identifier in order to make sure that you're not targeting a legitimate client in terms of some of the activities. We know people purchase properties, purchase vehicles to high value, so all of a sudden there's an uptick in terms of a value on a transaction, or maybe even paying a tax bill. And unfortunately, that happens so infrequently that all of a sudden this may become a red flag in a monitoring system. It's about working, again, on both sides of the equation to understand whether it's money, where is it coming in from and where is it going out. Now, traditionally, we've used money laundering tactics in order to identify some of these, which work to an extent because you can identify certain risk elements around it. But in terms of a longer play, the idea that or individuals are only going to transact in one manner is unrealistic. And I think that's some of the things we need to look at, is to say, what other key elements can we identify apart from just a single transaction, but looking at a trend. But similarly, some of the other things is these fraudsters don't operate in isolation. They operate across a network. And gathering network intelligence is important as part of this, to be able to see if there's common trends across a specific, either money going to a single account, money from specific various accounts across the globe. So those are some of the indicators that I think can be used in order to start to address some of the issues.
What do you think is the direction of travel in terms of the sort of the changing face of mule detection? Is there going to be something in the near future which is going to become an indispensable tool that we don't have now?
I think it's difficult in terms of AI, and I think any conversation today without AI being mentioned is rather tricky. But I think some of those indicators is going to come out through intelligence through the network. And at this stage, we've heard companies like Anthropic and some of the other tools that they are releasing starting to make a difference in terms of the risk identifiers. The challenge is putting in controls without impacting the client experience. And that's a key element, is trying to work with both the organizations that are developing these tools, but at the same time understanding the client side as well, so that they are not adversely impacted in terms of their daily experience in the banking platform.
Does that then play into the question of sort of who owns those inbound controls within an organization? Should it be more on the fraud side, or should it be more on the anti-money laundering side?
I think it's a combination of. And we're starting to see more and more organizations work in a fusion center where they're combining fraud and AML indicators, which gives us that benefit in terms of insight beyond just the fraud element. So absolutely, you got to take both sides of the coin in order to identify it. Together with that comes the cyber element as well. And I think that's a key factor in terms of risk signals, either from suspicious IP addresses, suspicious activities in terms of phishing, etc. in that sense as well.
Those risk signals then, what would be your sort of the top three indicators that you might be looking at a very large Mule network in terms of risk signal?
Specifically, transactions going to a single account. Alternatively, transactions that are going to a specific crypto type of wallet as well. Those are sort of two typical indicators. The third one, which is far more difficult, would be identifying where the values stay consistent across activities, which ultimately is being paid over to an organization which looks legitimate and potentially is a shell company layered multiple levels down from a legitimate company, which does provide some level of indication, but becomes more difficult as we start layering it into the system.
Kamlesh, is there one investigation or one kind of discovery that you could look back on from your career and go, that was the most impressive thing I've seen, or that was the scariest thing I've seen?
It's interesting you mentioned that, and I think we see this on a regular basis in terms of romance scams, and just playing out a scenario in this sense where someone in a psychology role, meaning either studying psychology or having been through the process to learn about psychology, became almost a victim of an employment scam where they were being coerced into driving some sort of activity in terms of making a prepayment for a promised job. And unfortunately, the psychology that goes behind these becomes more difficult as the victim actually is engrossed in the scam. So that whole spell that needs to be broken is something that's difficult. But having said that, sort of working with the victim is a key element, making them understand why they actually, or potentially what the red flags are and how they could have been caught out through this process. So it's interesting, even people at the top levels, we CEOs, CIOs that are tricked into certain things, individuals that are studying things within the human brain and trying to understand certain elements are caught out in this process as well. The only way is, through education, awareness, driving a lot more awareness. And I know there's a lot of regulation coming in shortly around education. Unfortunately, it's the effectiveness of that education, and that's the difficulty to measure, is how do we ensure that it's meeting the target that we're trying to address.
Thank you so much, Kamlesh. Really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.